Good morning. So, a few years ago, I was asked a question. If I could create a museum with anything in it I want in the world, what would that look like? Interesting, right? Well, it was an art museum, so that helped narrow things down a bit. I didn't need old dinosaur bones or anything like that. And it wasn't a physical museum, it was a book. So that also helped to narrow down the focus a bit. But as you can imagine with a project like this, it would require a lot of thinking. So today, I want to talk to you a little bit about my thought process. That project turned into the Ultimate Art Museum. And what I was effectively tasked with doing was telling about 40,000 years of global art history using about 300 images. Oh, and it needed to be accessible to young people as well. So I needed to do some research. I looked at real museum layouts, I looked at art history curriculums, art history survey texts, I even blew the dust off my old college notes. And I had to think about the things that I thought worked really well and the things that maybe could use a little work or could work better. And for that, I was able to develop a structure that allowed me to engage with so many different topics in one small space. Behold, this is the floor plan for my museum. Museums can be organized in many different ways. It can be thematic, it can be regional, it can be by mediums. I mean, there's so many different ways you can approach this. But for me and my brain, as I was tackling this project, the simplest thing seemed to me to do it chronologically. And then within that, I broke that down into different regions within areas. So if we take a look at Wing 1 in the pink, you'll see that's the ancient wing. And there I've broken things down into kind of smaller regions, ancient Egypt or ancient Rome, for example. Then in the green, we have the early modern period. And the regions get a bit bigger there. So now we've got bigger areas like Asia or Europe, for example. And then finally, in the blue wing, we have modern art and contemporary art. And there I've gone quite global, and one of the exciting things about doing this in this way is that you can see how, over time, the world gets smaller in a sense as people travel around and start to interact more. I'm going to go over some of the things that were on my mind as I was putting the rooms and galleries together in the museum, but I'll highlight a couple of things now before I get into that. One of the things that is really important to the project like this is that it's really important to think about what you don't include just as much as what you do include. And to give you an example of what I mean, I decided not to do a room on Orientalist painting. And that's a painting style that shows very stereotypical images of the Middle East. This happened around the kind of 18th and 19th century in Europe. Instead of doing that, I decided, wouldn't it be much better to provide more space from actual artists from the Islamic world who were creating art? So that's a choice there where I made about how to prioritize things. Another thing I noticed as I was doing that research was that sometimes you find that museums or survey texts will break European art up into many different movements, time periods, even regions within Europe. But sometimes other cultures from other parts of the world get one little section, one little chapter that covers everything from the dawn of time to contemporary art all in one place. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make sure that different cultures were represented across each of the three wings, across each of the three time periods. And I think that's particularly interesting in the modern and contemporary wing, because then you're able to see some really interesting conversations that happen around globalism and modernism, and how modernism can look very different in different places. This is the very first room in the modern and contemporary wing, and it shows exactly what I was just talking about. We have some beautiful examples of ukiyo-e prints from Japan. They show this very graphic imagery with these outlines. They're done on woodblock prints, which would have taken many, many different blocks to get these beautiful color juxtapositions. And many of you will probably recognize Hokusai here, and we have another work by Hiroshige as well. When Japan first showed at the World's Fair in Paris in the 19th century, everyone was amazed. People across Europe had never seen anything like this before. There was suddenly a craze to have Japanese fashions and furniture, and artists weren't excluded from this. They were seeing these prints for the first time, and they just thought this was incredible and that it could inform the way that they approach their own practices. You see Impressionists like Mary Cassatt experiment with printmaking. You see Van Gogh doing copies of these ukiyo-e prints. In this case, I have an example of a painting by Whistler, where he's done pretty much a like-for-like copy of in his own interpretation of this composition by Hiroshige. You see the bridge is similar in both pieces, and there's a man on a boat in both pieces. And then also, it's not quite as clear, but there's twinkling going on in the background there, and that was inspired by another print that Whistler had seen that showed fireworks. These movements, like Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, wouldn't be the same if they hadn't been exposed to these Japanese prints. Similarly, I have another room in the museum that looks at modern African masks alongside paintings by Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso. And I discussed them each and how uniquely beautiful they each are in their own way, but placing them together also provides me an opportunity to talk about how much Picasso was inspired by African masks as he was developing Cubism as a style. I think that if you are interested in art and art history, you may be familiar with these things, but a lot of people aren't and don't know that. And so what's exciting about putting these works together like this side by side in this museum, it's better than just doing a footnote or a side comment. You can really see the relationship between these things, and I was very excited to do that in this museum. One of the things that I was interested in doing was trying to approach art from multiple different angles. So in this room, we have a work by Romare Bearden on the left side. He was a Black American artist working in the 20th century. He worked across many different mediums, but he's quite well known for his collage work. A lot of his work addresses themes relating to Black American life and also into civil rights as well. And then here on the right side, we have a work by Hannah Hawk. She was a Dada artist, and she was very much at the forefront of photo montage as a medium. And she addresses many social issues, particularly relating to gender. Each of these artists could have fit in multiple different rooms within the museum. Romare Bearden could have fit very well in the room I have on Black American narratives. Hannah Hawk could have fit in feminist art section or in the Dada section. But in bringing them together, I was able to have a conversation around collage. I think what's important to me to be mindful of is that there's always multiple ways into an artist's work, and to not limit them by always discussing them in the same way. That could be not just only talking about them in relation to their identity or their medium or the themes that they address. Always remember that there's multiple points of entry, and that also helps to reach different audiences as well who may have different interests in how they engage with those things. By putting these things together in the museum and talking about collage, it doesn't preclude me from talking about the other things, so it's good to be open-minded. Sticking with that idea of taking multiple angles as I approach things, here I have some example of portraiture from the Rococo movement. And I want to focus on this image here on the left, which is a portrait of Ignatius Sancho by Thomas Gainsborough. I think this probably isn't the first example of a Gainsborough that would come to mind for most people if you said, show me a Gainsborough. But I think it's a really exciting example to go through because it shows us a portrait of a really exciting figure. This Ignatius Sancho was a formerly enslaved man who became free and then became a very successful businessman and was the first Black man to vote in a British election. At the time that this portrait was done, Gainsborough was in the home where Sancho was enslaved, and he was there to actually paint the women who lived in the house, and he just did this kind of quickly in passing. But now it's really exciting and important because it's one of the few, if not the only, images we have of him. It's an opportunity here for me to talk about Gainsborough. I've still done that. It's an opportunity to talk about portraiture. I've still done that. But I've also gotten to tell this other exciting story. And I think that's important to do as well, considering the fact that there are sometimes informational gaps around talking about representations of people of color in European painting. This is an example where I broke some of my own rules. So at the top here, we have a painting by Robert Duncanson. And he was an American artist, and this is in the European Painting Gallery. But it's my museum, and I can break my own rules if I want to. The reason I chose to do that is because I wanted to talk about the Hudson River School, which is a movement happening in the States, and how that related to landscape painting trends in Europe at the same time. This is another example where if you ask someone, oh, name a Hudson River School artist, they would probably say, if they knew what that was, Thomas Cole, right? But instead, I chose to show this work by Robert Duncanson. He's just as talented, and his work is just as representative of that style. That style shows us a lot of grand landscapes in America, and it's meant to convey kind of the beauty and majesty, especially as they're expanding out into the West. But Robert Duncanson was a Black American artist working during the time of slavery. He was a free man who was able to support himself and his family as an artist, which is already hard to do, and then adding all those other layers to it is really complicated. So it's really interesting to see that he was able to travel internationally and work in this way. Around the time that I was finishing the museum, I found out as well that Biden had selected one of his works to hang in the White House, so it's really exciting to see that his work is just getting more and more recognition over time, which is fantastic. It's important to be open-minded to tell new stories, dig up stories that don't get enough love, and to be able to shine a light on those things so that we're not always sharing the same artists, the same artworks all of the time. So here's another thing that was on my mind. If you're interested in art and art history, you may be aware that there's been an issue about the representation of women artists in historical texts and in museum collections as well. This is something that curators and scholars have been working on to fix for many decades, and we are making improvements, but there is still quite a ways to go. Bearing that in mind, in this project, I wanted to make sure that there was a good representation of women artists across the museum. This room is a really good example of that because it shows abstract expressionism, which is a movement where the women were very critical to that movement and the development of that style, but somehow ended up being left out of a lot of the conversation for a long time. Again, this is something that there are scholars working to address, but it serves as a good example of that issue. In this room, we have works by Joan Mitchell and Lee Krasner alongside Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning. And what's interesting about this room is back to that idea of what I said of what you don't include being important. Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock were married, and I made no mention of that on this page. And I have another gallery, another room, the Chinese painting room, where Guan Daosheng and Zhao Mengfu were married, and I don't mention that either. The reason for that is because this is a common thing that has happened in the past where women are sometimes discussed in relation to the men in their lives. Oh, she's the wife of this person, the daughter of this person. And I didn't want to fall into that pitfall. These women deserve a right to stand on the back of their own incredible works, just like anyone else. But again, in terms of breaking my own rules, I did do that one time, and that's with Diego Rivera. I said that he was the husband of Frida Kahlo. And I did that, as you can tell, to turn that idea on its head. And there's a couple of reasons why I chose him to do that. For one, Diego and Frida were not on the same page in this museum, so I felt comfortable doing that. But also, I had read an article about Frida Kahlo that was discussing her during her life as if she was his little wife who had a painting hobby, which is just insane when you think about her incredible work and her incredible legacy. So I decided to kind of turn that idea on its head. And it's really something only I would know, but I'm telling you, so. As you go throughout the museum, there's our museum texts, and you can think of them in that way, or you can think of it as me as your guided tour as well. And as a part of my practice as an art historian, it's very important to me to make sure that people feel that they can connect with the subject. I know that it can be intimidating for people sometimes, and one way I like to do that is by making connections to everyday life, making connections to pop culture. So I thought I'd point out two fun examples. Here in the Gothic room on the left, we have an example of an illuminated manuscript called Les Trébucheuse de Duc de Berry. It is a very beautiful, very colorfully illustrated book that has gold and all of these amazing things in it. And it was full of texts, biblical texts, and also these little calendar pages that show you the types of things that people do during different times of year. When the animators for Disney's Sleeping Beauty were thinking about how that film should look, this is one of the things that they were looking to find inspiration. And you can find that in the way that the figures were drawn in the film and the bright colors that they used. And even at the beginning, there's a giant book that opens up like an illuminated manuscript. Then jumping over here to the video room, I have an example at the top by Pippola Tourist. Obviously, it's a video still, but it shows an example of this woman running down the street, and she's owning her presence and taking up all of this energy, and she looks happy, and then suddenly takes this giant flower and smashes all of these car windows on this street. And Beyoncé saw this and was inspired by that for her video treatment for her 2016 video for Hold Up. So these are two big pop culture moments that are looking directly at art history for inspiration. And there's many more. I had to stop myself from mentioning the Ninja Turtles in the Renaissance room, but there's many, many more. If this were a physical museum, I would be able to do temporary exhibitions or rehang the art in some places, and I think that's a really important thing to do because museums should change and grow as people change and grow. Sometimes I look at the museum and I think, I should have done this artist or this movement, and that's okay. This is a very fixed museum, and that's fine. It kind of stands as a time where I can reflect on where we were in the past in the field, where we are in the present, and some of the ways that we can go in the future. And I feel very confident that as long as artists and curators and art historians continue to do that, which I know there's so many that are, that the future of the field looks bright. Thank you.